JotPsych is the first AI-powered EHR built for therapists. It automatically writes your notes and handles scheduling forms and more. Try it free and get 50% off your first 2 months with code JOE at jotpsych.com. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1297. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice you absolutely love. We want you to both sides of it. We want you to be thriving, have good operations, marketing, all the things that go into making a practice work. And we don't want you to lose your soul in the middle of that. We want you to love what you do, where you get to show up at your private practice and say, I can't believe I get to work with these clients and have this be my office, and that I'm building a community here and I'm helping my community and hiring people and all the things that help us love the work that we're doing. We don't want you to just give yourself a job. We want you to give yourself a business. And we do this 5 days a week to help you do that. So we've been covering all sorts of things in the last month. I mean, it's been an exciting month. As you've heard, we've started our series where we've had speakers from our group practice conference. That's to just get excited about May of 2026, when we're having the group practice conference here in Traverse City, Michigan. Just a reminder, those tickets go on sale on Black Friday until Cyber Monday. That's when we're having our biggest deal, and then it goes to the early bird. So make sure you grab that ticket over at practiceofthepractice.com/conference. We're going to have about 300 group practice owners where we're getting together in TED Talk style 20-minute talks on the main stage, and then about a third of the time is going to be conversations and facilitated discussions throughout a huge art gallery. So it's going to be a really unique type of conference, a lot of fun, specific around group practice. So a lot of things going on in our community. Hopefully you are getting involved and plugged in so that you can grow your private practices. Today on the show, we have Dr. Shireen Rizvi, who is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Montefiore Einstein Medical Center, and she serves as director of psychology training and director of DBT services and research. A protege of Marsha Linehan, the founder of DBT, Dr. Rizvi has become one of the nation's leading voices in translating DBT into accessible, real-world tools for emotional regulation and resilience. Her research and clinical work focuses on helping people develop evidence-based strategies to navigate stress, relationships, and emotional crises. Also, we have Dr. Jesse Finkelstein, who is a clinical psychologist, educator, and designer of innovative interventions rooted in DBT, trained extensively in evidence-based treatments for emotional dysregulation. We're going to leave that in because I just stumble over my words sometimes. PTSD and OCD. Dr. Finkelstein's work merges clinical insight with creative design. His workshops and digital initiatives have made DBT concepts engaging and approachable for diverse audiences, from teens and parents to clinicians and educators. And their new book is out, Real Skills for Real Life. Welcome to the podcast, the two of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, Shireen, let's start with you. I want to hear, it's been a bit since I've been in grad school, and I would like to think that through the podcast I keep up on things, but I'm sure a thing or two has changed when it comes to DBT. What do we need to all know going into this interview about DBT to make sure we have similar language, similar points of view, that we don't have outdated things from 20 years ago when I was in grad school? Give us a quick update in, a huge thing we could do a whole podcast series on right there.
I could spend a week on this.
What do we need to know going into this interview to be on the same page?
Sure. Well, I think probably the bottom line is that most people who have learned something about dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, especially if you learned about it 20 years ago, is that it was synonymous with the treatment of severe and chronic problems, like people who meet criteria for borderline personality disorder and engage in suicidal behaviors, self-injurious behaviors, in some ways really challenging, difficult patients that probably not everyone sees. So what I would say is important for people who are listening to know is that what has evolved over the past 20 plus years of research and interest in DBT is that it actually is being used across the board for a wide range of mental health problems. And most people who learn the skills, find that are a component of DBT, find that they are helpful for them regardless of what kind of mental health problems they have. And not only that, but the therapists who learn the skills find them helpful too. So if I were to say one take-home message is that DBT is not just for borderline personality disorder, it's for everyone. And that's sort of why the motivation for writing the book that we did was to make it more accessible to everyone and not just people in a full DBT program.
Yeah, so I can't wait to dig into just kind of the practical things for everyday life, those real skills for real life. Jesse, tell me a little bit about your work with AI and with technology and just the innovative kind of things you're doing. What does that look like?
So Joe, firstly, I should say that this podcast is particularly relevant for me since I just started my private practice. I think it's been maybe 2.5 weeks.
Oh my gosh, Jesse, you have to join the Practice Academy. We'll give you some months for free to dive in. Would love that.
Yes, I mean, all the things. What I will say is that, so Shireen was my introduction to DBT and CBT in graduate school. So I was sort of like a late in life learner. Is that like a late in life learner?
Second career.
Second career.
Saidi just said it, so now it's official.
Now it's yeah. So prior to graduate school, my background was in user interface design, graphic design, and marketing. And so when I went back to graduate school and I was learning all of these exceptional sort of interventions that have such real world application, as Shireen named. These DBT skills are skills that I use every day. One thing that became sort of clear and this is, I think, where Shireen and I really connected, was these things are wonderful and they're not always communicated in ways that people actually want to engage with. And I don't mean just in terms of accessibility, but when we think of from a marketing perspective, something that is actually desirable, something that people want to pick up, not just that it's palatable. So I think sort of what Shireen and I have really worked hard to do, especially with this book, and this is sort of built on a collaboration around animated videos around DBT skills and other sort of worksheets, is to create something whereby we are trying to make these skills as enjoyable, informative, and really sort of digestible as possible. And then that sort of extends into how I sort of think about sort of the AI technology elements of all the other stuff.
Yeah, amazing. Now, I mean, I know we were talking beforehand, we all know about the new Harvard Business Review report where they were talking about Gen Z's the way they use ChatGPT the most. It wasn't for term papers. It wasn't for just organizing their life. It's for emotional support in a therapeutic type of way, which I think is exciting because when I was in my 20s, the only reason I went to therapy was because I wanted to become a therapist. And I thought, well, I don't need therapy. So it's I wasn't even thinking in that way. So it's exciting in that sense, but it's also really scary to think about, are these algorithms really doing what's in the best interest of those clients? And even when we go back to, which episode was it? It was really recently where we talked about the outrage algorithms. It was just probably a month ago or so. We'll find that and link it in the show notes. But just that idea that these algorithms are doing things that are often clinically not okay. And so how do you two think about technology, AI, DBT, all mixing together in a healthy way and an unhealthy way? And Jesse, since you're kind of more on the tech side, why don't we start with you, and then Shireen, maybe you can weigh in on the DBT side of how technology is interfacing with it.
So what I will here is offer a qualification, is that technology is constantly changing. New companies are emerging that are trying to address some of these issues. What I can say broadly is that one thing we need to do is sort of consider the economic motives behind some of these more popular AI engines. And one of the things that that's behind these economic motives is engagement. A lot of these sort of AI platforms want and measure success by user engagement. And that's not necessarily how we measure success in therapy. And what I have noticed, and this is through work with clients, is that in many ways, a number of these platforms can do sort of the land on, if we think dialectically, acceptance and change, on the more acceptance end of treatment, where they are offering people either reassurance, they're offering people sympathy, they're offering people validation in the absence of change. And for many folks that I work with who, for instance, experience anxiety disorders, OCD, these engines can actually be really harmful in that now they become a tool for compulsing. And so the reality is that AI is here. It's not like, it's like we can't suddenly have this thing disappear. So I think something that Shireen and I have talked about and been thinking about is like, A, how do we educate consumers on how to engage and interact with some of these technologies effectively? And B, how do we go about trying to, in the very small way that we can, shape the conversation around the development of these tools so that they are addressing both of this sort of ends of the dialectic? Because A, the reality is that the technology is here, and B, the other reality is that a lot of people, A, can't afford therapy, and B, it might not be accessible. So these technologies can, in fact, be useful. So how do we actually make them effective?
And Shireen, where do you see DBT just as a approach being enhanced through technology? Like, is there more exposure to it and maybe it becomes more of a language? And where do you feel like it's maybe misrepresented?
Yeah, and certainly I'm of a different generation than Gen Z, where I think as a clinician and as an educator, I'm almost always going to encourage real life interactions. And I'm not just talking about therapy, I'm just talking about social interactions in general over talking with a bot or AI. And as a person of a certain generation, I am consistently floored by what AI can do in a good way. And so if I go into one of these AI platforms and I say, tell me about the opposite action skill from DBT, it's going to teach me, and it's going to probably be accurate and helpful. The problem is a person who wants support doesn't know how to ask that. Right? Doesn't go into the platform saying, I want to learn this skill to help me change. Instead, the person might say, I feel sad. And as Jesse was saying, the AI agent will validate support, but not say, or at least not currently say, how about you go outside and take a walk, right? How about you get active? How about you go call a friend, which would decrease engagement with the platform, but increase, more skillful behavior. So I think there are people in this sphere doing research, doing work, interacting with the AI companies to get it to be more consistent with evidence-based practice. And in my history as a researcher and a clinician, what I have found is that researchers cannot keep up with the pace of change. And so by the time people do a study and develop an intervention that can be employed in tech, it's already outdated. And so what we really need are the companies themselves to say, we want to interact with these researchers and evidence-based clinicians and get it into our platforms from the get-go.
Yeah, I think the point that Jesse made of like AI is here and knowing how to do prompts. Are there prompts that the two of you would recommend that therapists kind of teach their clients? If you're going to use AI, please use prompts such as this. Are there ones that you've seen that maybe are just better prompts? And maybe this is outside of your scope, but just what have you just kind of seen be good ways to get actual like good information out of AI?
I think it's I'm going to say the therapist thing, which is like, it depends. It depends. It's so context dependent. Like I have a client that I work with where he experiences sort of chronic loneliness and will engage in the AI for sort of reassurance seeking, which, it offers him a bit of short-term relief, and in the long term doesn't necessarily, as to Shireen's point, provide instruction around how to potentially behaviorally target that loneliness. So, for him, we've talked about just not using the AI at all for consultation in that way. And B, if you are going to use the AI, how can we do it within the rubric of our conceptualization? So, for instance, if we are looking to increase behavioral activation, then consulting the AI and helping facilitate those goals. So, I guess in some ways, it is maybe less a matter of prompts and more about defining what are the client's goals and how do you want to use the AI as a tool to help facilitate those goals.
So it sounds like really starting with the clinician and that relationship, saying you're working on anxiety, you want to feel that pit in your stomach not be there. Right now it's 5 out of 7 mornings you wake up with this pit in your stomach. And okay, we're going to work on some different DBT skills. We're going to work on some meditation, some socialization skills. Let's plan out a calendar with AI's help for you in like a day by day or week by week, and then checking back in with the therapist. Is that kind of what would be a implementation of what you're talking about?
Yeah, that could be one implementation, and it could be just okay, so let's say one of our goals is some sort of behavioral activation a day. Like you're going to go outside and then we want to consult with the AI to come up with ideas. Okay, given these parameters where you live, etc., what are some things that could be useful? So how do we sort of use the AI in service of the goals, not in service of the compulsion, the avoidance, the reassurance?
It's funny as you say that, I forgot about something I did while I was going through my divorce and I wasn't even thinking DBT or life skills, but I just made a list of 10 things that made me feel better. And it was, like doing a plank for a minute, calling a friend, working on Duolingo for another language, going and doing some watercolors, and just made a list of 10 things. And then I would just, every day ask Echo to pick a number 1 through 10, and whatever it was, I would do it once a day. And it just became kind of a game. I don't know what I'm going to have to do. But it was all stuff that I knew that I did. But then I would take 15 minutes to go do watercolors, and it would take my mind off of just the BS storm that was going on in my brain. And so it sounds like there's a lot of really creative ways to use the AI to do that sort of thing.
I think, Joe, that's a perfect example of you can train the chat based on the specific skills you're practicing to help prompt you. I've also seen folks where we've trained it to conduct behavioral chain analysis. So rather than necessarily waiting in session to sort of identify a target behavior or the antecedents and consequences, they can use the AI chat and then bring in the conversation. I think that's the other piece that's oftentimes missing is how do we then, if you are going to use this AI, how do we make this process transparent where instead of this being something that happens outside of therapy, we're actually sort of seeing the conversation and making it part of the treatment.
Something always comes up when you're running a private practice. Well, Gusto's payroll and HR services can make it a little easier. Gusto was designed for you, the small business owner. They take the pain out of running a business, automatically calculating paychecks, filing payroll taxes, setting up open enrollment. Gusto does it all. Want more? Time tracking, health insurance, 401k, onboarding, commuter benefits, offer letters, access to HR experts. You get the idea. With Gusto, you can focus on the joy of running your business. It's super easy to set up and get started. And if you're moving from another provider, Gusto can transfer all the data for you. It's no surprise 99% of businesses said the value they get for Gusto is worth the price. And here's the best part. Because you're a listener, you get 3 months totally free. All you have to do is go to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. I'm telling you, you're going to love Gusto. Get started today. Shireen, you trained with Marsha Linehan, the founder of DBT, which had to have been an amazing experience, and to be so close to the founder of a whole thing that shaped therapy. How have you seen things evolve in the DBT world since the early days?
It's evolved a lot in some ways, and in other ways, I would say one of the things that we in the DBT world want to maintain is keeping the integrity of DBT as originally designed. So I say that because what you see with a lot of treatments, and this is not unique to DBT, is that a treatment gets out there and people learn about it, and then clinicians learn about it or researchers learn about it, and then they immediately want to adapt it, right? They want to change it. They want to make it their own. They want to put their own flair on it. And I think that is just a natural tendency that we all have and clinicians have, because we want to contribute something. We want to be unique and use our own brains. The issue with that, of course, is that none of those adaptations have been studied in the same way that the original DBT has been. So those of us who are kind of trained in the original model, so to speak, of DBT are really focused on how do people learn about it in an adherent way and actually do it as designed, even as you think about how do I talk about DBT when I'm working with a different population, or I want to use DBT now with children, and there hasn't been a lot of research on DBT for children. How do you maintain consistency with the treatment while thinking about new populations, new problems?
Yeah, I love that. Now, early on, you both were talking about how DBT really has shifted from being very kind of specific to diagnoses, so the general population can get a lot out of it. I'm a dad. I have a busy life. I'm raising my daughters. I'm in a relationship. What are the things that the average Joe, literally, could be implementing in my life that would just make my life easier?
Shireen.
Sure.
I'm
well,
punting the question.
No, that's okay. I mean, the easy answer is like so much. There's really so much. But what I will say, like from the point of view of DBT and kind of one of the models that it subscribes to, is that when we are suffering or having struggles or problems, we can really approach it from a problem-solving point of view. And that is really to realize that everything that we're experiencing is a problem that other people in their, around the world have experienced, and there are possible solutions to how we want to approach that. So, and also just to an earlier question about working with Marcia directly, is like one of the things that I learned early on is how relevant these skills are for my everyday life as someone who does not meet criteria, as far as I know, for a mental health problem. And lives a, stressful life. So I think there's a few things that I would say as like the primary take homes for me is that, one skill is to focus on how do we reduce our vulnerability to stress and emotion dysregulation. And that is in DBT referred to as like the ABC please skills. And actually, Joe, you referenced that you did this maybe without even knowing it, but this is what you described doing is called the accumulate positive skills. It's doing something every day that gives you a sense of pleasure, mastery, joy as a way of reducing your vulnerability to all the other stress in your life, right? So how you programmed your echo is accumulate positives. But then we also talk about building mastery, doing something every day that makes you feel like you accomplished something. And usually that's doing something that you've been avoiding doing, but it could be exercise. It could be making a meal from scratch instead of getting fast food. It could be paying the bill that you've been putting off, or calling the insurance company, like all of these things that we put off. When we do it, we're building mastery and doing it. And then there's other skills about like managing your sleep and your eating and your exercise and so on, so that you are more regulated in general. So that would be like one of the main take homes for everybody, I think. And another main take-home skill, that's one that I have started to practice more and more as I've gotten older, is mindfulness of emotions, meaning noticing, becoming aware of emotions when I have them, knowing that I don't have to act on them, nor do I have to try to get rid of them. I can just notice and experience them. And that, and even say to myself, it's okay to feel this, right? No matter what I'm feeling, that has become a very powerful tool for me, rather than doing whatever I can to get rid of a feeling that I don't like. It's just moving in to that experience.
So great. I love the practical skills. When we're thinking about, I think about how we teach kids math and reading, and we were teaching them coding, and now AI has said you don't have to really learn that anymore, even though everyone was jumping on to getting their kids to do coding. If we wanted to teach kids some DBT skills that you think would help just change their ability to interact with the world, Jesse, in writing this book, what are some of the skills that you think would apply directly to kids and teenagers?
I mean, one, I would probably say all of them. And I think the general principle that like you're highlighting is we don't really talk about emotions, and emotions is something to learn. Like we don't educate kids, at least I didn't receive this education, on like what an emotional experience is, what emotions tell us, and how to respond effectively with emotions. I think oftentimes, or at least the way I was raised, is just emotions happen to me and then I just do whatever I do. And instead, like in DBT, there's a very different orientation where we begin to sort of like notice like emotions are like this symphony of sound. And then how do I, as the orchestra conductor, sort of create that sound in the service of my goals? So I think that, like, to Shireen's point, mindfulness of current emotions, mindfulness broadly, how to use emotions to help guide effective problem solving, and or recognize emotions and recognize when they're not effective or the urge is not effective, and engage in other effective behaviors. I think all of that education is critical. And I hope, and I know there are efforts to make that happen, and I just would love to see more of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to kind of zoom out a little bit, and right now at the time of this recording, there's a lot going on in the U.S. We've got a lot of political stuff going on. We've got climate issues. We've got social media outrage. Oh, I did find what episode that was about so that was episode 1282, just a little bit ago, end of October, Moving Beyond Outrage, where Dr. William Brady talked about the outrage algorithms. He's one of the leading researchers on outrage algorithms out of Northwestern. So if you're interested in that, 1282 is a great episode talking about outrage. But I'm wondering, when the two of you think about DBT and the skills you talk about and kind of the future of just emotional regulation, how do we handle big things right now? Because I think on one side, people say we have to stay involved because they want us to not pay attention. And then on the other side, we hear like you've got to stay grounded and know how much you can handle. But then oftentimes it's like, well, but what if the world's falling apart and I don't know? So how do you guys, maybe even personally, how do you guys use DBT in your own lives to just manage all the stuff happening in the world right now?
I think, Joe, it's almost as if you're in my brain when you just said all of that, because I was like, yes, that's exactly how I feel most of the time. And I think that DBT gives us real tools to deal with this because of the, it's in the name, the dialectical focus of the treatment is basically saying that we have a certain number of assumptions about the world. One assumption is that tension and polarization is inevitable. And we see this right now, of course, polarization. And I think there's a lot of language like this is unprecedented, but in fact, we've always had polarization. This might be unprecedented for our generation, but certainly not in the history of the country or the world, right? So recognizing that polarization is inevitable is a constant, if you will. I think it actually helps me because it helps me it helps me increase my acceptance of what is happening. And I think the key piece of this, and from a dialectical behavior therapy lens, is that acceptance does not mean approval or liking it. I cannot like many things that are happening right now, but I can understand how they got to be this way. Right. So that's something that I work on in my everyday life. This is a skill in DBT called radical acceptance, which is radically accepting the moment, the world, the situation exactly as it is, which when I accept it exactly as it is, it allows me to figure out what I want to do next, because I'm understanding reality as it is instead of pretending that it doesn't exist.
I think building on that, so Joe, what you were describing, sort of like maybe like almost like an internal polarization at times, like grounding myself, attending to what I need versus actively changing the environment, putting pressure on, let's say, politicians or whoever to do different things. And at times there can feel like this competing need, like, quote unquote, which one's the right thing to do? Do I take care of myself or do I focus on changing the world? And I think going back to what Shireen just said is that both truths can exist, that in DBT we're oftentimes looking for a synthesis and a middle path. And that middle path is constantly changing. What feels grounded in one moment at one point in time may not be the same thing in a week, let alone a year. So I think that there's a degree of compassion and gentleness that's helpful, at least I find, to bring to myself, where I'm keeping these both truths alive. And I'm often frequently asking myself, okay, in this moment, what does that synthesis look like? What is it that my wise mind is saying would be effective for me, with the understanding that that may change?
So awesome. The last question I always ask, and Shireen, we'll start with you, is if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Really, what I want them to know is that we have a wide array of tools that are available to them if they are feeling stuck with any patient or with themselves and they want to learn how to do things differently. Pick up a book about DBT skills, ask AI about DBT skills, and learn about this arsenal of tools that are available, evidence-based, and work.
And Jesse, what about you?
My pithy answer was to get a mentor like Shireen. And I would broadly say that, being in private practice, one of the things that has sustained me thus far, and really it's become so clear to me, is just how important it is to feel connected to colleagues, how you can't do this work alone. And so, consult with the AI and then consult with a real person and experience that human connection. For me, it's increasingly clearer why that's so critical.
Mm-hmm. So amazing. Shireen, if people want to get the book, where can we send them?
The book is called Real Skills for Real Life, a DBT guide to navigating stress, emotions, and relationships. And it's now available wherever you buy your books.
So awesome. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Thank you, both of you, for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Oh, so many things in this episode to reflect on. So, that idea of mentorship, of being around people that are ahead of you, right at the end that Jesse was talking about that is so important. We see that all the time in the Practice Academy of people that, like Jesse's saying, he just started a counseling practice, to be around other people that have started a solo practice or that now have added their first person in group, or if you just hired someone, that you meet someone that has 5 people. That idea of we don't have to start from scratch. We are not in this silo, no matter where you live in the world anymore, and you can go be around other people. So if you want to join the Practice Academy, head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/membership. You can read all about it there, schedule a tour with Sarah to just get behind the scenes and decide if it might be a fit for you. Also, we couldn't do this show without our sponsors. Gusto is our sponsor today. Honestly, let's get real. None none of us want to learn calculating tax withholdings. If you do, you are a very unique therapist. When it comes to payroll, benefits, HR, we wear so many hats as owners, but honestly, payroll doesn't have to be the thing that you do. Gusto's who we use, and they're awesome. You can get 3 free months when you run your first payroll over at gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.